Boys really need a narrative. If we look around the world today among people, the small cohort of people like myself, who spend a lot of time doing psychotherapy with boys, I think most would agree that the kind of therapy that boys respond to best is therapy that's driven by a narrative. There is a story. It does very little good to try to just empathize with boys' feelings or to ask them what they feel when they come into kind of a therapy situation. That doesn't work at all. It usually falls on its face. Instead, boys seem to be looking for what's the meaning of what's just happened? How do I kind of put this in a context that makes sense for me? Even when they make mistakes, even when they mess up, it has to be part of a narrative. And so part of what they're looking for from people like ourselves, from adults, is help shaping that narrative. We begin constructing that early in a child's life if the child is our own, or even if we are a teacher. We begin shaping it very early, and then we add to it as we go along. But even when we just kind of interact with an adolescent boy, it still is important to have some sense of a context and what is the meaning of what's about to happen or what has recently happened. And that brings me to this question of who owns the meaning or the story of boyhood. When I was doing my research with kids around the world, after the first year, I noticed that they were answering a lot of questions the same way, and I needed to mix the questions up and ask some new kinds of things to try to understand what was important to them. And one of the questions that I asked was, if you had a choice between writing a complex book report and pushing a rock up a hill that took 110% of your strength, which would you choose? The book report or the rock? Which would you choose, sir? Of course you would. We would all choose it. It's more interesting, right? It seems more interesting. There is a kind of an adrenaline component to it. Many of the kids that I was interviewing were really excellent students. These were kids that are good writers and could write a book report without great difficulty. So it's not that they are incapable of the other task, but they choose the rock because it seems really interesting. When I asked the question, I noticed that many kind of let their attention drift out the window like, have you got a rock out there? Are we going to do this? Let's go push the rock. And I began to talk to kids about why would you want to push the rock? Why is it so important? Well, for one, it seems more exciting and fun. For others, it seems like it's just a challenge and I want to find out if I can do it. Many kids imagine themselves pushing the rock with others looking on and admiring them. Maybe standing and applauding for them. Trying to get the rock to the top of the hill. There's another reason also. When you push the rock, you know when you're done. At the top of the hill, the task is completed. When are you done with a book report? Is anyone ever really done with a book report? It can always be better. You're never done with a book report. So the sense of having something completed is very important. What are the two most popular shows with men everywhere in the world that English is the primary language? The two most popular shows the world over are both on the Discovery Channel. One is Deadliest Catch. You could die doing that job. That's interesting. And number two is Dirty Jobs. Both shows hosted by former opera singer Mike Rowe, who has been repeatedly interviewed about his success and has said that I am portraying work in which the task is finished. Even Austin's Butterfly, through all of its iterations, was eventually finished. And there's something satisfying about that to men, and we should not ignore that because so many men in the culture work at jobs where there isn't that sense of completion and finality, and that is an existential issue in the lives of many men. And we shouldn't make that the existential issue in the lives of so many boys who never quite get finished with their schoolwork. Most of childhood now is about sitting in a chair, paying attention, being quiet, doing what you're told, until you get, the job at the end of the rainbow that you're promised. Whether or not it's a good job or a job that's meaningful to you, you have to just sit and be a receptacle instead of being more active. So, who owns the meaning of boyhood? Of course, there are multiple narratives. That's the reason why it's so important for boys to explore the story of their own life through their creative work, is that there are so many stories, and the story doesn't emerge and doesn't become real until it's given voice or image. That's just the truth. If it stays dormant, if it goes unsaid, if it goes unillustrated, it doesn't exist. It eventually just fades away. I've included some quotes from kids from around the world. One thing that I assigned kids to do was what's called a 6-word memoir, which is something that I had read about in the New York Times, where you had to kind of sum up your personal memoir in 6 words. And so I asked boys around the world to do that. And this one boy wrote, "I will write my own story." The primary missing ingredient in the lives of young people, the thing that separates them from a sense of personal accomplishment, maturity, and resilience, something that was a part of kids' lives for millennia, but is now conspicuously absent, and is at the heart of all of the behavioral and mental health issues that we have with school-age boys, not just in our culture, but around the world. Something that was always part of the transition from boyhood to manhood, which you began no later than age 12 or 13, which was the seminal thing that kind of made you a part of your community, that gave you a sense of identity and gravity, gave your life some kind of meaning, and helped you to understand that, yes, someday I could become a man, is this. Can't hardly see it. Purposeful work. Some type of purposeful work. There is almost no purposeful work in the lives of kids. Because they are asked to focus so exclusively on being good students, there is almost nothing of interest that they are given to do. That's another reason why Harry Potter is so interesting. They have a very important and serious job to do. So creative work is a part of this whole spectrum of purposeful work. And when it becomes really authentic and personal, when it comes from yourself, when it's more self-directed, it becomes that much more purposeful. Purposeful creative work leads to the potential for a kind of pragmatic transcendence. When I went out researching significance in boys' lives, they don't have much to say about an abstract idea like significance. Because it's like, well, we kind of know what you mean, but it's not that important to us to talk about. But there is the sense that when it's a more kind of pragmatic or practical transcendence, it's more interesting. And these are the elements. These, by the way, are boys from my own community in Rhode Island who designed the world's first autonomous remote-controlled boat to sail across the ocean from New England to France. They tried twice. The second time, it got about halfway before they lost control of it. They're in the midst of trying a third time. It's a very difficult undertaking for a group of high school boys, an almost impossible task. One of them has a father that's an engineer who's assisting. But the possibility of novelty, it has to be something that's really difficult. If it's not difficult enough that you might fail at it, then it's not hard enough. The real possibility of failure is what makes something interesting and exciting to do. I talked earlier about the scale, working together, an opportunity for recognition because boys are magnets for recognition and desperately want to be admired. This is a conflict because we say, well, gosh, isn't this just the narcissism of boys and the narcissism of males? I don't know, maybe it is, but I know that it's so fundamental to their identity and to their experience in life that if we try to deny it, then they just feel as though, the circle is incomplete. A chance for mastery in terms of skills, a chance to do something that's visible, and that may also lead to some sense of a lasting legacy, something that will be a part of a community and will have been an important contribution that is made to the development of something important that's happening in the world. When I talk about boys wanting to have a chance to participate in making the world, I can't emphasize that enough. I think that's what they want to do. They want to be decision makers and have a chance to do things of consequence. I believe that kids should be involved in running their own schools. I believe that they should be charged in running the finances of the school, that they should design the buildings, that they should do the brick and mortar work, the carpentry work, they should do all of that themselves. They should be involved in helping all the different kinds of organizations that they belong to run better, because that's the really interesting stuff that would make life more interesting. When I say artist, I mean the one who is building things. Some with a brush, some with a shovel, some choose a pen. Jackson Pollock. Handwork is extremely important, and I think that overall we don't recognize how important the opportunity for handwork is to boys. And many have not had a chance to do any type of handwork. The vast majority of boys that I interviewed had never used traditional tools. And I don't know quite how you grow up and connect to the world without having a chance to do this handwork, which leads to a sense of agency and control, a sense that you have some freedom to affect how the world comes to life. It's an issue of accessibility, a point of emotional entry. These drawings are done by children in a psychiatric hospital. This child has actually depicted the psychiatric hospital. If you're a psychologist looking at these drawings, one of those drawings is conspicuously missing something that the other three drawings have. It's something of critical importance in terms of this idea of emotional accessibility. It's probably pretty hard to spot because the images are a little bit bright here. Thank you. Who said that? Thank you, sir. I've asked that many times. You're the first person. This is missing a doorknob. That's never a good sign. The absence of a doorknob means a kind of domestic building that feels closed off, that's inaccessible, that lacks warmth, and has a degree of coldness to it. And there's a rigidity to this drawing, along with the black crows flying in the sky, that suggests that, yes, there's a degree of coldness, of alienation, of depression in this drawing that the others don't have. At the very least, it's comforting when kids' drawings of a house or a building have a doorknob. Most boys have never used traditional hand tools, and so building that kind of sense of, your agency, your sense of connection with the world through your hands has not materialized in the lives of most. I have chosen to live where I live and to kind of operate a small blueberry farm so that my son would have to do some hand-based work. There would be some work that was just hand-based work rather than all of the other cognitive things. My son is like the great majority of 13-year-old boys in the country. He would rather do all things electronic. He would rather watch a screen than go out and pick blueberries with Dad. I don't blame him. But there is something important in that experience, right? There's something important in connecting with nature through your hands, in drawing, with your hands, using your fingers and your hand in some way to connect with materials. I noticed that the first time that I had those kids come into my studio in Hoboken. The first time I noticed exactly how important it was for them to put their hands, and what's the very first thing that kids do when they have no instruction, no guidance, no knowledge? They make their mark. That's it. Boom, I make my mark. That's the first thing. I want to make my mark. I was here. I was here. I exist. Modern children face an unfortunate fact. For all the love and attention lavished on them, hardly a soul takes them seriously. Despite abundant indulgence and protection provided to middle-class children in particular, few are given anything of significance to do. Most of us don't believe that there is anything that they can do. But we should give projects and work of consequence to young people, and we should do it as soon as they are remotely. My son was when he was 7 years old. In my office, I went to Staples and I had a little badge made that said, Addison Cox Creativity Specialist. And I gave him a budget of $100 to go buy toys for the waiting room that would be appropriate for both boys and girls and kids of all ages. And I made a little spreadsheet. and we talked about the budget and how to use this, and the drive to Toys R Us to figure out how to spend that money was, I think, one of the great experiences for him. Because there was a sense of excitement of I'm responsible for this. This is a serious set of decisions. And that's often what I'm doing in the kids that I work with. I almost always, kids who have problems at school, who are disruptive in some way, I am always asking schools to give the kids a job, to make them part of the management team rather than the rank and file. It's more interesting when you become a decider, when you're someone that has choices to make, and they're so ready for those opportunities if we just look around. But instead, we just usually say, okay, go play, go do something else. You don't want to be in the way or, do your homework or something of this nature. But what about all the other stuff that gives you a sense of agency, a sense that you're really participating in shaping the world in some way?